Dylan, that was one of my top five fades of all time. I know you're a fan of the show, big, day one guy. You know about my work with some of the DJs, Skrillex, Diplo, David Guetta out there in Ibiza when I'm doing my Wine Island stuff, and it feels great to nail one when you're on. It's the first time you've been on the show, and that was a beauty.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate y'all having me.
Absolutely, good to have you. Yeah. So, and I'll have you introduce yourself in just a moment. Of course, to the three or four people who might be new to this, I'm Scary Alvarez. I'm a sherry wine destroyer, Wine Island enjoyer, Jake's grandpa, and Cindy's plus one once you had me. And I've been in the doghouse here and there because I've been up late watching some of this offensive coordinator stuff that's been going on at Wisconsin, which we'll, of course, get into in this program. But Dylan, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience? I'm sure many of them already know who you are. I'm familiar with your game, but here's your moment to cook.
Yeah, mostly, just a Token Creek, Wisconsin native with an internet connection. You can find maybe some of my incoherent ramblings on the internet, badgernotes.com, do a little bit of work for Athlon and on occasion, Bucky's Fifth Quarter. And, chop it up with the boys once a week on the Talking Badgers podcast where it's a little bit off the rails.
You, Dylan, you have as much modesty as I have lack of modesty. So I think if they took the two of us and averaged us, our self-perception will come out somewhere in the middle. And by the way, I knew this, but it didn't. I just wasn't thinking about that. You and I are colleagues at Bucky's Fifth Quarter. What an exciting time to be alive, to be working with the Dawn at the B5Q.
Yeah, business is booming.
The topic of the day, obviously, there's a huge commit, Jalen Williams, four-star of the Wisconsin Badgers, a flip from the Michigan Wolverines, and that is a show in and of itself. We're all emotionally turgid about that, but we're going to talk about the other big story of the week. Phil Longo heading out of Madison unwillingly or willingly. I'm not sure exactly how that shook out, but he was he was relieved of his duties with the Badgers. So without getting into the specifics of how and why that took place, Dylan, I'd love to discuss some of the potential replacements for Phil Longo in Madison. And, I think it's that kind of silly season, kind of like we were doing before Luke Fickell was hired. Not obviously that was done pretty quickly, but after Chris was relieved of his duties and then Jim Leonard was the interim coach, there were all kinds of names floated out there. Obviously, Jim was kind of the quote unquote clubhouse leader, I think, for most people who in the know. And then out of left field, like a bolt of lightning, came Luke Fickell. You think we're going to have something like that happen with the offensive coordinator? What's your vibe on this?
So I've kind of got a little bit of a split opinion on that. My expectation is that Luke will probably end up with a fairly safe selection. However, I say that wanting to fully acknowledge that Luke Fickell won't get to make a third offensive coordinator hire if he doesn't knock this one out of the park. And, if Luke Fickell fails, effectively Chris McIntosh fails. And so I think there's going to be, the powers that be might have incentive to, find the money to take that big swing. And so I do think that there's a non-zero chance that they are going to, outpunch their weight. So I think that the vested interest that Chris McIntosh is going to have in this going well, because of the sizable investment that's been made into Luke Fickell, I do think that there is going to be some additional funding potentially come out of the woodwork. And one name that, in particular that I think might fit that description, this is not based on anything I've heard in particular, with him, could be like a Ben Arbuckle out at Washington State. He spent 2 years now as the offensive coordinator there. There are a lot of people, like, obviously when you got a Cam Ward out there, you have an opportunity to do something special. But even without him, things haven't really dropped off at all. They've got John Mateer out there quarterbacking, only a sophomore, which I think is notable because I think that in an ideal world, your offensive coordinator is going to be someone who could potentially bring an established quarterback with them and kind of expedite this process, because there is a very real possibility that our quarterback room turns over in a pretty major way. And so Ben Arbuckle is someone I think that might potentially fit that description.
Yeah, I like that one. And because I just am a voracious reader, that's the number 9 overall offense in college football this year up there in Washington State. As you mentioned, without Cam Ward. So That's something that a guy, you can have a ringer of a quarterback his first season as coordinator, as he did with Cam Ward, and then not skip a beat. In fact, the offensive ranking have improved. Now, yes, the competition might be a little bit different this year, but it's still been a pretty solid schedule. They've been a fringe ranked team for a good portion of the season. They've looked really good. And that's actually someone I had on my list too. And Arbuckles is up there. I think I want to, before we proceed, I want to get the Jim Leonard, the safe clubhouse leader guy, Gino Guidugli. I think that's the one that's everyone thinks is the safe play, and that's not to denigrate Gino. I mean, Gino was a fine offensive mind, looked really, really, really solid in his lone year as OC in Cincinnati in 22. But some wonder, if this is your boy, and then you're Luke Fickell and you come over to Wisconsin, you don't take him as your OC, you go and get Longo, and that I think that's sticks in some people's mind, and also the fact that just 1 year as an offensive coordinator isn't a ton of experience, and of course going to Notre Dame and doing some QB coaching and things like that, it's impressive, objectively impressive stuff. Again, not OC. So I kind of labeled it on Twitter with someone today. It's the really, really safe play that is also not that safe, given track record. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And, I think that's one where, like, if you had to slap a grade on it before, like, assuming, in this situation that he was the hire, if you had to slap a grade on it without ever seeing it pan out, you call it a B. I think it's a safe, pretty safe hire, but like, to your point, not necessarily proven. I think this is just going to tell us a whole lot about Luke Fickell and his willingness, to potentially go outside of his tree, because Luke Fickell spent 20 years effectively in two locations, at Ohio State and Cincinnati. So he doesn't have, a large working network to pick from. And Gino is somebody who fits this, he's worked for Wisconsin very briefly, obviously, before he ended up at Notre Dame. We know this is someone who Luke values having, but he also has a recruiting background. I think that shouldn't be lost in this. He has netted multiple four-star quarterbacks in his time. Both at Cincinnati, he maintained one at Notre Dame, went out and got another one. Played a huge role in Grant Steck landing at Wisconsin in the short time that he was here. Pulled Flanagan outside of Wisconsin to bring him to Notre Dame. So he's got some recruiting chops, and I think that is important. He has worked with quarterbacks for a long time. I think that he is a pretty safe hire. And if Fickell is jaded enough by the working relationship that he very clearly didn't have with Phil Longo, this represents an opportunity for somebody who is both qualified, has Power 5 experience. They've worked together. He's recruited at a high level. I think there's a lot of things to like. I think that a lot of people, like you said, have maybe been a little bit dismissive of the idea because of how much sense it, does kind of make. But I think it makes a lot of sense. It really does.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, by calling him the safe pick or the Jim Leonard, I wasn't suggesting that he's going to be the guy that everyone thinks is going to be named as the OC, and then at the last second is going to be someone else. That could happen, but if again, this is strictly Vegas. I am a betting man, but if I were to bet on this, he's probably the safest play. Now, I will say, kind of on the issue of a safe pick versus swinging a little bit bigger. I know that Fick swung bigger with Longo and got burned by it. But I don't think that means swinging big is a bad thing. I think, as you well know, Dillon, having a track record of success as an offensive coordinator, preferably in a Power 4, but showing it multiple years, kind of like you mentioned with Arbuckle, I think that is hugely valuable and certainly worth considering. I'm thinking about a second-year offensive coordinator, and I've looked at the schedule for 25 because this is the reality. This is Luke Fickell's making or break it year, 25. You got at Bama, at Indiana under Cignetti, at Michigan, probably improved Michigan. They're going to be even madder about what happened today with Williams. At the Gophers, at the Ducks, and then at home you got Illinois, Iowa, Ohio State, Washington, and Maryland. I have never in my lifetime of being following the Wisconsin football program seen a more heinous, daunting schedule than the one I just described for you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like that that kind of gets overlooked because obviously we know we're in the midst of a pretty grueling schedule right now, but I think that's just the reality of what the Big Ten is now. I think we all need to kind of take a step back and recalibrate, I don't want to say our expectations as a whole, because I'm not going to tell anyone how to fan, but I think that's the reality, is that you're going to face 3 ranked opponents every season moving forward. Like, that's just the reality in the depth of the conference. So yeah, I mean, have an opportunity to bring in somebody who is established at that level, I think is, incredibly important. And you look at this 2 deep, and obviously that can turn over in an off season, no matter what now with the transfer portal, but this is a very veteran laden 2 deep that you're looking at. And, so they're going to have to bring in some experience from the portal again, just to be able to field like a, competitive team against the daunting schedule that they're facing. I believe in the talent that they have recruited, and, in a perfect world, if they can retain them, have some of them step into some bigger roles. But, I think that we're losing a lot of experience on the offensive line, and that's obviously kind of the anchor of what, this iteration of the offense has been. So it's tough. That's a daunting schedule going into next year, especially in a make or break season.
It's and 26 is no cupcake, but 26 compared to 25. And I'm looking at Minnesota's right now, 25, and it's significantly easier. I mean, you don't have a Bama, you have Cal Bears. And again, this isn't for me, but like just Nebraska, Purdue, Michigan State, Rutgers, like Northwestern. It's just, but that's, I think some would say, the more cynical amongst us, we benefited from that in 2016 and 2017 when we're facing Rutgers and Maryland as our crossover games, and other teams are playing Ohio State. It's just that's the way it goes, and that's the big leagues. But I will say, to get back to my original point, I could see a scenario where Luke Fickell, who I'm sure has at many times, probably more than he'd like to, looked at the schedule next year. He knows exactly what he's facing, and he might say, how much of a chance can I take? I mean, or maybe the flip side of this, maybe I do need to take a little bit of a chance, step outside my comfort zone, and get a dude who I have seen doing it for multiple years in Power Four, and maybe go with that. And that might, again, cut towards shelling out some money. So is it crazy to go after a guy like Denbrock at Notre Dame? I mean, is that off the charts?
I think part of why I struggle with that one in particular. So you look at a Phil Longo, who was entering this year the 13th highest paid offensive coordinator, which I think, like, that's a credit to Wisconsin for, shelling out real money for an offensive coordinator. Something I expect that they'll do again. But Denbrock is, the highest paid offensive coordinator in college football. I believe he's over $2 million right now. And so that's a pretty sizable leap to take. So no, I mean, ultimately, I think it makes a lot of sense if there's a world where you could do it, but I think it would be difficult, to convince him to leave Notre Dame, making the money he's making, even if you could offer him similar compensation,
Yeah.
to get him to leave and to come here.
And of course, it's not naive to think this, but kind of the, loyalty guy inside of me says, that him and Fickell were together for 5 years at Cincinnati. You never know what those relationships are like. I don't have any insight into how well they got along, but it could be something.
Another thing to consider there too is that Marcus Freeman, was also a Cincinnati guy, and so, like, there's some overlap there too. Obviously, Fickell was with him for longer than Marcus Freeman, but you're right. Like, obviously, Fickell, as is a big relationships guy, and you can never take anything off the table if the compensation can make sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Let's throw out a couple other names. I think we should tackle these, and we can, again, no one knows if they're even looking at these people. But how about Jason Eck, the former Badger out in Idaho, is the current head coach? Could he be lured back to Madison? I know some have said he runs a little bit of a kind of Alvarezian 1994, 1995. Passing isn't the most important thing, kind of, and it might be a little too running game oriented. But what are your thoughts on Eck?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting one, and the one that, like, really could make a lot of sense. Obviously, like, again, Fickell has really worked his network, I think, for the most part, but, like, that can include the other members of his staff. And I do think that there is a world where he would embrace bringing in somebody with Wisconsin ties to this staff. I mean, obviously, their in-state recruiting is not the end all be all, but there is definitely, some inroads to continue to be made there. And I do think that I don't think Fickell wants to go the whole, revert back to what we were doing under Paul Chris by any means, but he wants to run the football. He wants to be a team that is going to be built in the trenches. That's abundantly clear. He just wants to be multiple. He wants passing to be a threat. I think that could be a fit. That makes a lot of sense. There's ties here that helps in terms of recruiting. He's established. He's been able to prove it. That's a really interesting name that I think is going to be one worth monitoring moving forward, just to see, are there enough connections between his staff, to make that happen? And is he or does he not care? And is he just going to kind of, be willing to just interview whoever is there and take the best play or take the best coach?
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. Well, let's step outside the box just a little bit. Although this is a name I've seen pop up, it's a name that I suggested without knowing any sort of specifics about fit or how Game of Thrones Signetti would get over him. But Mike Shanahan, not that Mike Shanahan, but the IU Mike Shanahan, who we can talk about their schedule and all this stuff, but the reality is that offense has looked with Rourke has looked absolutely fantastic this season, seamless, like it had been there forever. And some of that is certainly Signetti, having worked with him at JMU for so long. What are your thoughts on this? Might be a little bit of a left field thing, but the possibility of getting looking at Shanahan.
Yeah, he is actually really high on my my wish list personally. I mean, you said it right there. Like, they were able to step in, implement something from day one, and it just took off. Yeah, you can talk about the schedule all you want, but the results are there. I mean, they've hardly been held under 30 points, but maybe once or twice all season. Mike Shanahan is somebody who is he's gonna get a lot of looks from people outside, and with the money that they just shelled out to keep Signetti there. They might have a funding issue. It's hard to say, but I think Mike Shanahan is one that really intrigues me, because I think it's a system that both mirrors what it is that Fickle is wanting to do. And quite frankly, Wisconsin needs somebody that's going to be able to be plug and play. I mean, obviously, we've spent the last couple of years kind of overhauling a system, to replicate it closer to what pretty much every other Power 4 program is running to a certain extent. But yeah, they're top 10 nationally in completion percentage, yards per completion, yards per play, like you name it. EPA per play, they're one of the more efficient offenses. Even adjusted EPA per play, they're one of the top 15. So Indiana's offense is the real deal. And Mike Shanahan is someone who absolutely is worth a look, and somebody who I'm hopeful the staff will at least kick the tires on.
So I like to hear that. And one thing that just stood out to me is Rourke has been so good. He gets injured, they go to the second guy, and they almost didn't miss a beat. I mean, that obviously, as Wisconsin fans, we know that you can miss a beat with the second guy. And I don't want to. This isn't the pile on Braden Locke show. That kid's got a good heart, and I know he works hard. Good football brain, and he's taken a lot of grief. But that's where we are now. This is 2024 in the NIL era. I don't think sending him DMs and telling him he's a bum is the way to go. I think you need to be kind, remember he's a human being, but being critical of his play on the field is certainly within bounds. And they didn't miss a beat, and now they got the kid back, and now basically the toughest opponent that IU has faced this year are the critics from the SEC, suggesting that they have no business being in anywhere near the top, and should they, as they likely will, lose to Ohio State in the horseshoe this weekend, there's a chance IU might stick in those rankings, and that's going to rankle a lot of people in Tennessee or Georgia or Bama, whoever and that's the world we live in.
You can only play who's on your schedule, and they've gotten it done, and they've done it in a convincing fashion too. It's not like they're squeaking out games, 24-21 over a lesser opponent. Like they've gotten it done, and even if they do lose, they should remain in those rankings right now. I think that in my opinion, they've proven themselves as a playoff contender. Absolutely.
And well earned. And I don't like Signetti. I think he's a cocky shit, but man, he's proven it this year. He's done really well. He's certainly the coach of the year. Yeah, he's coach of the year in the conference. I think he does it almost like jokingly. He's so cartoonish about it. Okay, now here's the part of the show. We're kind of starting our descent here, but this is the Ohio State coach or former coach portion of the show. We will have to deal with these two. I think you know who I'm talking about. We'll start with Brian Hartline, who's considered the co-offensive coordinator, was the guy in 2023. Of course, they brought Chip Kelly in to kind of take the playbook from him in 2024 and said, stick to the receivers. But an absolutely dead-eye recruiter, especially at wide receiver. you're not going to have a better receiver room in college football year in and year out than the Buckeyes. Uh, is there any? I know him and Fick didn't necessarily. There were kind of ships crossing the night a little bit there at Ohio State, but it is an Ohio State guy. I know they have some contact. Any fire there, smoke there?
I think part of where my pause with him specifically would be Brian Hartline, obviously one of the hottest candidates, across college football at this point. There's no doubt it's well earned. He's done it at Ohio State, but he's where my reserve would be is that I think he's probably on the precipice of being a head coaching candidate somewhere. And so what kind of investment are you willing to make in him? Or do you believe that he can step into Wisconsin, get the job done immediately in year one? Because I think that's what you're needing to bank on. Because I do think that he's someone that will, be on to greener pastures before too long. But I also, part of my concern is, yes, absolute lights out recruiter. There's no doubt, but he's doing it at Ohio State. That's a little bit different animal. And, I just would have a little bit of pause. Like, can he, I don't think Wisconsin is capable of pulling that same talent. And, can they do the same things without elite talent? I guess that's all where my pause would be. But I think it would be malpractice not to have a conversation.
Kick the tires, certainly. And again, I'm not of any opinion that if Hartline were hired, he would go and get the exact same guys. But he does have this when he walks into a room. Hey, these are the guys I recruited, these guys I coached. And he can list off 10 NFL receivers, including probably 3 or 4 of the best receivers in the NFL right now. That is something that Wisconsin, certainly in their entire history, has not had. As I mentioned, Ohio State is likely in any given cycle to have more 5-star receivers in that class than Wisconsin might have in 10 years as just 5 stars, which is that's something.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And here's one. I think this is probably a long shot, and I don't have any feeling on him and Herman. Herman and Fick. There's some smoke that they don't necessarily get along great. I don't know. I don't know anything about that personally, but Tom Herman, who's been relieved of his another job at FAU after having left University of Texas, but he also was the top assistant in 2014 when Ohio State won a national title. That offense was humming, top 10 offense, great running game with Zeke Elliott, incredible passing game. You kick the tires on that guy.
Yeah, I think you absolutely do. I still have to vet out some information, but it's my understanding that he is somebody that there's a certain amount of interest in. Obviously there is that Ohio State connection there. And Tom Herman was somebody who was, as part of what led to his getting fired when he did, is he's looking for a Power 4 offensive coordinator job, wanted to make that move at season's end. I'm not saying that the timing of the Phil Longo firing and that, even though the timing of it all would be, convenient, I don't believe that he's some runaway or anything, but I've been told that there is a certain amount of interest and that he is a legitimate candidate. So I do think that, I think it's someone worth exploring. But it's just interesting to, as you mentioned, 2014, that's a long time ago. Does he still, some of his offenses haven't really produced at FAU in recent years. So
yeah,
hard to know if you can view him as a plug and play upgrade.
Yeah, that's all well said. So I have a wild card I'm going to bring in, but I want you to let me know if there's any kind of top line candidate that we haven't discussed that you've had your eye on that you think Fick should give a look to.
I think my outside the box one, another one that's pretty high on my list, is just Brennan Marion at UNLV. I think would be a really fun one. His go-go offense that he's got running out there, even they're down to a backup at this point, and the offense is still humming. They're over, I think, 36 points a game this season. They've just been electric out there, and I understand the level of competition is a little bit lesser, yes, but it's a really fun, unique running offense. Like, I don't know. I think that there are elements of it that could absolutely work at Wisconsin, and that's a high risk one, high risk, high reward potentially. But I think it would allow Wisconsin to be the power running team that they want to be, but also be multiple and a lot of pre-snap motion. He's somebody who I think it would be really interesting. I think he's going to get a better job at season's end regardless, but that's one that I think is outside of the box, no real connections. But he's just running a really great offense over there. And so I think he's one that I'd love to hear about, but probably a little bit too outside of the box.
Yeah, it might be a little, and fairly or unfairly. Oh, it's not air raid, but like that kind of gadgety offense. Even though air raid's not, we know that it's not a gadget, but it's just that whole. I could see Fick running the opposite direction. But well over there, Eric Morris, North Texas. That's another name that's popped out. Texas guy. So he's at Texas Tech, comes up in Texas Tech, does some time Washington State. Really, really good offensive mind. I think that's pretty clear. Hasn't been as successful as a head coach as he probably would like to be. What are your thoughts on Eric Morris?
I think that's a really interesting one. One I haven't really given a lot of thought to. And, we're seeing a trend across college football right now. Jeff Hafley is one of the people who started it, but there's so much responsibility put on the plate of a head coach nowadays that there are some people I think would probably relish the opportunity to just focus on offense, to just focus on defense. With all the other things that, kind of come with it. I think that's a really interesting one. And one that would definitely be worth exploring. Cause again, I think there's a lot of parallels to what they have, started to build here. I mean, say what you want about it. Obviously the offense has been, not very productive the last couple of seasons, but I think they've brought in a certain amount of personnel. There's been a culture shift. I think that there are elements here that you can take without having to overhaul that would mesh well with what he does.
Agreed. I agree. And him and a number of other candidates on this list. Okay, you're now Fickle / McIntosh. I'm not sure what the decision tree is there, but you have the guy you. I mean, it's not shoot for the stars and grab the best coordinator in the NFL or something, but like the guy that you want to get, and then I want Dillon Graff's guy who you're predicting we're going to get.
So I think if I'm McIntosh, the one who ultimately it's going to be, I think I would probably imagine. I think Gino's the betting favorite right now. As you mentioned, I think Vegas betting odds, if there were any, he would be the most likely candidate up there. I think there's a chance that they're going to punch higher, and so my pick. Again, no real ties here. This is just a shot in the dark, but would be Ben Arbuckle. I think it makes a lot of sense. He's proven it after losing a Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback, arguably putting together or helping develop a quarterback who maybe he's not a Heisman Trophy candidate, but he's kind of in that adjacent conversation. And we need to be able to bring a quarterback with whoever this offensive coordinator is going to be. And because we have to hit the ground running. And so I think that there's appeal in bringing in an offensive coordinator that has a +1 in hand that can immediately step in and help elevate things. So Ben Arbuckle is that's my pick right now.
I think that's a good one. And again, I think we're in agreement that Guidugli again is sort of the Jim Leonard in mid-November pick right now. With the exception, though, I don't think that a certain portion of the Wisconsin fan base is going to absolutely flip the F out if he is not selected. Whereas, and I understand where the love came from. I am a huge Jim Leonard fan, and it remains to be, no one will ever know how that would have gone. But the challenge would have been incredibly steep for Jim, knowing what we know now and knowing what his recruiting chops were. But you get a fun offense in there, and who knows? Maybe you have a coordinator that didn't take a head coaching job on the West Coast at Fresno and is in Madison. You just don't know. There's all kinds of unknowns there. But anyway, I guess we'll see what happens. But Dillon, I know you got to get rolling here. But thanks so much for jumping on. Really appreciate the time. And my guess is that within a couple of weeks, we're going to know a lot more about this issue.